Several presidential candidates in Chile held their last campaign rallies ahead of the first round of the presidential elections. Brazil's Supreme Federal Court gave a 5-day deadline to Jair Bolsonaro's government to pronounce on the adverse health situation and malnutrition suffered by the indigenous Yanomami people. Anti-coup protests continue in Sudan despite heavy police repression that has left 39 protesters killed so far. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. Several presidential candidates in Chile held their last campaigns rallies ahead of the first round of the presidential elections. Opinion polls show that none of the candidates have the required votes to win this first round, and it is very possible that Chileans will have a second round at the polls next December 29th. Gabriel Boric, the candidate from left-wing coalition I Approve Dignity and one of the favorites to win the presidency, closed his campaign in Valparaiso, while Jasna Proboste from the center-left-wing New Social Pact did so in the city of Concepcion. In the meantime, far-right candidate José Antonio Cast from the Republican Party, harshly questioned by human rights organizations for meeting the families of the carabineros arrested during the 2019 protests and for his statements in defense of the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet, finished his campaign rally at Las Condes district in the capital. A few days before the general elections in Chile, relatives of those arrested for participating in the widespread anti-government protest and the social unrest of 2019 are demanding their release. Detainees' relatives announced and denounced that the authorities are trying to transfer the youths to the Colina high-security prison and stressed that they are political prisoners whose basic rights have been violated. They also warned of police procedures that prevent them from visiting their relatives, as well as delays in the legal proceedings, with many still held without charge, despite calls for amnesty and the release of the young prisoners. And now we go live with our correspondent Brian Muir, who brings us the latest developments about the upcoming regional and local elections in Venezuela.
Today is the final day of campaigning in Venezuela for the regional elections, which are going to take place this Sunday. At 11:59 tonight, all electoral activities have to come to a close. All campaigning has to end. The media can't talk about the campaigns anymore. The candidates can't go out on the streets. So it's the final stretch, and all across the country, candidates are coming out for their final marches, for their final speeches, with the hopes of winning one of the 3,082 positions in regional and local governments that will be up for grabs this Sunday, with over 70,000 candidates competing. The government is rolling out its Plan Venezuela program to guarantee the integrity of the elections and the security of the over 14,000 voting centers across the country. Over 356,000 members of the military are coming to the streets to protect the voting centers, the candidates, and the electoral observers, with the European Union sending 100 observers this time for the first time since 2006. So as the campaigning comes down to a close, once again it looks like Sunday is going to be a day of victory for the PSUV Plus Gran Polo Patriota coalition, as the Venezuelan right continues to be divided and marred by opportunism.
Thank you, Brian, for this report. And now we move on to other topics. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court of Justice in Nicaragua asked President Daniel Ortega to initiate the process of withdrawal from the Organization of American States. The highest instance of the judiciary thus joins the request of the Nicaraguan parliament on this issue. Acting Secretary of the High Court, Gerald Arias Lacayo, read the agreement of the judicial body, which details the support to the request of the National Assembly to the President, in his capacity as the head of state, to denounce the OAS Charter. The declaration of the judicial branch of the Central American country comes a day after the legislative branch approved a resolution in which it rejected the declarations of the organization, qualifying them as interference. Vice President of Nicaragua, Rosario Murillo, made them remarks remarks on the subject. In Bolivia, a meeting of social movements in defense of democracy was held, while the government of President Luis Arce assesses the damage to the economy caused by the strikes and the protests promoted by the far-right opposition sectors. The massive event, held on the highway that connects El Alto and La Paz, saw the participation of multiple social sectors, led by the Bolivian Workers' Confederation. During the day, activists committed themselves to defending the country's governability in the midst of attempts at destabilization promoted by the far right and condemned by the majority of the population. Meanwhile, the government is assessing the damages caused by the strike promoted by the opposition sectors, a move which has been denounced as a part of a renewed strategy to oust the government of Luis Arce. Authorities of Bolivia's Ministry of Public Works, Services and Housing denounced that the strike promoted by the opposition sectors caused heavy losses in the air and land transportation. Minister Edgar Montaño informed that the total losses in the institutions attached to the ministry alone exceeded $2 million. He also pointed out that the loss of these economic resources has a direct impact on the social programs promoted by the government for students, pregnant women, and also senior citizens. The minister emphasized that the opposition's demands repeal Law 1386 was only an excuse to commit acts seeking to destabilize the country. Following the repeal of the law, the same sectors have changed their demands and are calling for the release of supposed political prisoners, among them the former de facto and coup plotting President Yanomami. Colombia's Prosecutors' Office will charge police officers for homicides during the national social unrest in early 2021. The Attorney General's office summoned this Wednesday 3 Colombian policemen for charges of aggravated homicide after events that took place during the national strike, which lasted almost 3 months and saw heavy acts of repression by the security forces against the demonstrators. According to a joint report by the non-governmental organization Temblores and the Institute for Development and Peace Studies in the Paz, during the national strike, 1,649 arbitrary detentions, at least 346 disappearances and 41 cases of homicides allegedly committed by the national police were reported. We'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. This Wednesday, Brazil's Supreme Federal Court gave a 5-day deadline to Jair Bolsonaro's government to pronounce itself on the adverse health situation and the malnutrition suffered by the indigenous Yanomami people, especially the children. The court order responds to a demand from the political party Sustainable Network and the Federal Public Ministry demanding the Bolsonaro government to guarantee the protection of life, health and safety of the indigenous population. Judge Luis Roberto Barroso also determined that the government must report on the nutritional situation of the Yanomami people, also the children, as well provide them with solutions for access to drinking water, sanitation and medicines. The former Argentine judge of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, Raúl Zaffaroni, warned about the hatred from the opposition and stated the results from the elections saved the country from a new coup attempt. The former judge reaffirmed the indisputable value of the results from the legislative elections that saved the country from a new coup attempt. In an interview, Zaffaroni condemned the statements of former President Mauricio Macri, who on Sunday called for a transition as orderly as possible, as if after the legislative elections there will be a change of government. For the magistrate, the statements made by the former executive had a destabilizing purpose, and at the same time, he highlighted the mobilization called by the government on November 17th at the Plaza de Mayo as a way of recovering the mystique and renewing the fight. And we remain on topic. Thousands of Argentines gathered in the capital Buenos Aires in support of President Alberto Fernández and his administration. Supporters of the ruling Front for All coalition mobilized in Plaza de Mayo in front of the Casa Rosada presidential building to mark the anniversary of the return of former President Juan Domingo Perón on November 17, 1972, after 17 years of exile following a coup in 1955, in which he was overthrown. The head of state took the opportunity to rebuff criticism from the opposition, encouraging people to never give up, in reference to midterm legislative elections, which his ruling coalition lost on Sunday. He also followed up on the need to reach an agreement with the opposition in order to move forward with the government's programs. And the Argentine Front for All coalition celebrated this Wednesday the Day of the Peronist Militancy, an annual event during which political organizations, social movements and trade unions remembered the 1972 return of the country of leader Juan Domingo Perón after 18 years of exile. This year's celebration came just 3 days after the legislative elections. The date saw a rally in the symbolic Plaza de Mayo, where President Alberto Fernández addressed supporters and called for unity among progressive forces. The event, promoted by the General Confederation of Labor, was also accompanied by different social and labor movements and the human rights organizations. Fernández told the packed square, "Today is an important day for us to start the second stage of our government and seize the opportunity to thank all those who worked to secure results in last Sunday's elections." On Wednesday, the United States criticized the Russian government for locating its troops in the border with Ukraine and for an alleged anti-satellite drill. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lord Austin warned that these activities of the Russian government, carried out in its own territory, do not favor a climate of security in the region, and affirmed that the intentions of President Vladimir Putin are unclear. Russian Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu responded to the accusations and assured that the missiles launched during the anti-satellite drill struck an old satellite with very high precision, reducing the claims of the Pentagon chief to fabrications. Welcome to another blog. On Wednesday, Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel urged the increased quality and power of scientific education in the country, especially regarding the study of the coronavirus pandemic's impact and the students' dynamics in social networks. With an encounter with academics from the Ministry of Education and Higher Education, the head of state acknowledged that these two phenomena have had a strong influence over teaching in the nation. COVID-19 distanced students from schools, weakening the reach of this institution in the youths, teens, and children. Although Díaz-Canel saw virtual learning and non-conventional methods as a way to handle the situation, he stressed on the importance of combining it with a presence at the classrooms. Now, referring to the Internet, the Cuban president encouraged citizens to see it as a tool for elevating culture and access to information. He also recognized there is an abuse among students in social networks and addressed the consequences of these behaviors, as for the lawful procedures that may seek to reduce such practices. And Belgium tightened its coronavirus restrictions on Wednesday, mandating wider use of face masks and enforcing work from home, as cases spike in the country's fourth COVID-19 wave. From Saturday, all people in indoor venues, such as cafes and restaurants, will need to wear a mask unless seated. Nightclubs may have to test their guests if they want to let them dance mask-free. People wanting to eat in a restaurant or go to a theater already have to present a COVID pass showing vaccination, a negative test, or recent recovery. Most Belgians will also have to work from home 4 days a week until mid-December. According to the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, Belgium has one of the highest cases per capita rates in the European Union, at around 1 per 100 people over the past 14 days.
Fortunately, we have vaccines. Fortunately, 9 out of 10 adults in our country are vaccinated. And it's thanks to your efforts, it's thanks to the effort of all those who have been vaccinated that today we're not in lockdown. It is because of you that life can go on. That there is frustration and disappointment, I understand that. We hope that the fall would have been lighter and that we would have had a winter without COVID. I know that many people are tired, especially those who work in care, who are once again submerged by the pandemic.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Street clashes again shook Sudan's capital on Thursday, a day after security forces shot dead 15 protesters in the bloodiest day since the military's October 25th takeover. Since General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan detained the civilian leadership and declared a state of emergency, citizens had been protesting against it, causing violent confrontations that have had police fire tear gas to disperse dozens of anti-coup demonstrators, braving an intensifying crackdown that has drawn international condemnation. Thousands took to the streets in the capital and other cities once again on Thursday, but were met by the deadliest police suppression so far. At least 15 people were killed, most of them in Khartoum, raising the toll since the coup to 39. And Israel launched 2 missiles against the south of the Syrian capital Damascus in the latest attack against the country. The missiles were launched from the occupied Syrian Golan Heights against the southern area of Damascus, according to Syrian news agency Zana. The 2 missiles were fired in the early hours of Wednesday morning and targeted an empty building, which was hit by 1 missile, while the other was intercepted and shot down by the Syrian army's air defense system before hitting its target. The Israeli air defense offensive did not cause any major damage or casualties. Israel has launched regular attacks against Syria from the occupied territory of the Golan Heights, with an escalation in attacks as the Syrian government advances in eliminating Western-backed terrorist groups from its territory. An Israeli military court on Wednesday sentenced a Spanish aid worker to 13 months in prison after convicting her of illegally funding a Palestinian militant group. The move comes as the Israeli regime bans human rights organizations linked to Palestine. Spanish aid worker Juana Rashmawi had been working for the Union of Health Work Committees, which Israel banned from the West Bank in 2020, claiming her Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a revolutionary Palestinian organization the Zionist regime describes as a terrorist organization. Her sentencing comes weeks after Israel outlaws 6 prominent Palestinian civil society groups, alleging they were also fronts for the PFLP. The groups Adamir, Al-Haq, Bizan Center for Research and Development, Defense for the Children, International Palestine, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, and the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees all denied the allegations. European donors who supported the banned groups and the United Nations have asked to see concrete evidence from Israel supporting the ban.
The only thing she has said is that she was a worker of the Health Work Committees, an organization that was banned by Israel. Regarding the funding, funds were brought for health programs. If any diversion happened, she, of course, wasn't aware of it. How is it possible to lie in public about something that came from the court? That wasn't so. Manipulate and defame the reputation of someone, and moreover, to try and justify the criminalization of human rights organizations by using someone else, a different case. It seems pretty vile to me.
Thousands of people protest in Athens on Wednesday to mark the anniversary of a 1973 student revolt against the U.S.-backed junta, an annual event that often sparks violence. 24 people were killed at the Athens Polytechnic in 1973 when the junta sent troops and police against a pro-democracy student uprising. 20,000 turned out in the capital Athens, according to police. However, the demonstration remained peaceful into the evening. Most of the marchers were students, unionists, and members of the leftist parties. In Athens, thousands marched to the U.S. Embassy to protest against Washington's support for the Greek military dictatorship during the Cold War. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.